Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our next installment of the Oakland County Planners Gathering. Today, we're covering Oakland County's Hazard Mitigation Plan update. Just a few reminders before we get started. I'd like you to mute your audio and turn your camera off and use the chat function in Zoom to ask any questions, and we'll open it up to question and answer after the presentation is completed. Today, we're going to be covering the Oakland County current hazard mitigation plan, talk about the update, what to expect and when, and answer any questions that you have. And I'd like you to welcome Thom Hardesty and Rob Seeley, both with Oakland County's Emergency Management and Homeland Security Department. So Rob and Thom, take it away. Thanks.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for taking some time out on this beautiful morning to spend a few minutes talking about hazard mitigation, which seems appropriate since ice storm was in the top 5 for concerns when we did a survey the last time we did a hazard mitigation plan. So it seems appropriate. As he mentioned, myself, I'm Thom Hardesty. Many of you prior may have heard us called Oakland County Homeland Security. We went through a few changes here within the county with the new county executive. We have created a new department, which is the Homeland Security and Emergency Management, with a couple divisions. And one, the formerly Homeland Security Division, is now our Emergency Management Division, and then we have safety as well. So Rob and I are both going to take turns going through some of this presentation. Just a little bit of background. I'm a retired cop, worked in Auburn Hills for 26 years. Rob is a retired Dearborn, worked there for nearly as long, and then he's still now as a resident of White Lake, also on the planning committee there. So these topics interest him more than just from the work here. So a couple things with hazard mitigation we wanted to talk about today is, one is hazard mitigation planning. Talk a little bit about our current plan, but most importantly with us is the planning process that we're going to be getting underway, why that's important and why we want your involvement with that. Hazard mitigation grant projects, some examples, and then we'll also talk a little bit about the hazard mitigation grant application process. So as you're probably familiar, hazard mitigation is just a sustained action to reduce or eliminate long-term risk to life and property. These definitions are important because FEMA, which is where we seek money for a lot of these things, sticks to these definitions when we're trying to seek money either before or after a disaster. And so the hazard mitigation plan is simply a written plan to try to plan to reduce that loss of life and property from disasters. So why do we need a hazard mitigation plan? What makes it important? One is understanding the risks that are in our communities. A hazard mitigation plan is not the same for Oakland County as it is for West Palm County in Florida, or as it is for California. Every community, every state have different risks and different concerns that they have. So the planning process is important to go through to identify what those risks are, both in what the actual risks are based on history, as well as what the perceived risks are and concerns are of the people involved. It helps us prepare for disasters. Again, like this morning when we're late into last night and this morning dealing with the ice storm. We look at past ice storms that we've had, which I think was 2013 was the last bad one. And things we learned from that end up in our hazard mitigation plan as we're trying to plan and prepare for these disasters. We're looking to become a more sustainable and disaster resistant and resilient community. We have had activation. So in 2021, we had 7 times that our emergency operations center was activated. From the data that we looked at, we could find that it had been activated 7 times in the previous almost 20 years prior to that. So we don't really, from an emergency management side, argue so much about what is causing climate change or not. What we look at is the reality is we're seeing more weather-related incidents that are causing disasters in our communities. So whatever the cause is, they're happening, and we need to prepare and plan for them. Certainly, we want to make sure we're looking at proper building codes and planning codes. I'm sure all of you have paid attention to the earthquakes over in Turkey, and a significant amount of discussion about how many believe that building codes were reduced to allow faster construction of housing. And now one of their hazards that they need to be concerned over there is earthquakes, and now we're seeing the impact of that. So that the hazard mitigation planning process is important to make sure that then that information from what those hazards are get incorporated into building codes. And then always important is money. The reality is that funding for grants, both pre and post disaster, rely on these hazards being identified in hazard mitigation plans. So, and again, what are we seeing? What kind of hazards are we seeing? This is a photo from a tornado in White Lake just a couple of years ago. That is an overview of a home and an area in a neighborhood from that tornado. So you can see the trees along with the house and other items in the backyard. I always found it funny. You can see in the top of the screen there, wiped out damage on the deck, trees over, and then you look and there's a camper sitting there in another house with no damage. And that's what we see often out of tornadoes that have a pretty direct path. This is some more on a damage from that tornado. Water main breaks, infrastructure. This was a water main break on 14 Mile in Farmington Hills. This water flooded, there's a house that you can't quite see in there. It flooded that house in about 3 minutes. That house had to be destroyed and took about 300,000 people and a couple of hospitals, some without and some down to a minimum amount of water pressure. This is a look down at the repair section and how large of pipe and how far down that is. So that kind of infrastructure. Local general storms and flooding that we've seen, maybe not rising to the level of a national disaster, but causing local damage. The pandemic, COVID-19 is a disaster, and pandemic is actually listed again as part of our hazard mitigation plan. One of our items in there is responding to a pandemic and dealing with that. Again, one of some local flooding, smaller projects that we see. So when I say we're talking about that we have to update our hazard mitigation plan. Rob would normally say that when I say we, I mean him. But in this case, we're talking in a broader term than that. Every city, village, township in Oakland County, we're going to be looking to help participate in planning our hazard mitigation plan and updating that. And again, that doesn't mean just one rep. Police, fire, DPW, water departments, economic development, and of course, planning and engineering. Sometimes that means they're city employees. Sometimes that means they're working as a contractors for an engineering firm. But bringing a diverse group from each community together to work on potential hazard mitigation strategies in their community is important. So we'll be at some point this year, we'll be reaching out to each community, asking them to participate in it. We use countywide departments such as the Road Commission, Water Resource Commission, all 28 school districts we reach out to and ask to participate. So again, looking for a wide plan, and then we actually survey the public to get feedback from them, and we'll hold a couple of public meetings where we try to get people interested in those. So we mentioned earlier money, hazard mitigation. There's a new name for some of those grants called building resistant infrastructure and communities, BRIC grants. They do annually. There are hazard mitigation grants, the BRIC grants, post-disaster. So for example, there was a federal declaration for urban flooding that covered Oakland, Wayne, and some of Washtenaw County. The year following a disaster, FEMA will make funds available for those communities to address those hazard mitigation plans. Now, the other side of being ready with projects is if those communities don't have projects to use that money, they'll open those funds up to the whole state. So there were times when there was money, for example, for flooding in the mid-state when it took out a lot of farmland, but then there were hazard mitigation funds that were available to the rest of the state because they didn't have enough projects to use it up there. So again, having these plans ready where you have issues that you want to address, maybe you don't have the funds, it's important to have those ready. And to be eligible for that funding, the hazard must be addressed in the plan, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. So with that, we have some specific projects that Rob's going to cover to talk about, give some examples about hazard mitigation projects and where funding was received and what kind of things can be accomplished with that.
So one of the things 2 years ago that we applied for here in Oakland County is some backflow prevention for the southeastern Michigan or southeastern Oakland County for the basement flooding that they had going on. The Water Resources Commission applied for and were approved for about a third of the project that they want to get done for backflow prevention. So that project will be going forward probably within the next year. A lot of this money doesn't come as soon as you apply for it and get approved for it. It might take a while to flow to the community, but once it flows to the community, then they can use it to spend it. They also have a project in there for scoping. It's a scoping project to see where that excess water moves once the backflow prevention is used in one community, where that sewer water travels to and what other communities it would affect. Oakland County Road Commission and the Oakland County Water Resources Commission also applied for a improvement to a drain that's behind the road commission. It's a creek that has run behind there for many years, and it's caused a lot of problems for flooding for the road commission. It floods into their parking areas and into their gravel parking areas, and it damages them. So they're trying to encase the drain to protect the buildings in the parking lot in that area. Another project that the Oakland County Water Resources Commission applied for this year is at the Pontiac Water Treatment Plant. The Huron River in its flood stages at 100-year flood stage, it can impact the electrical systems at the water treatment plant, and that of course would be very negative for the Huron River. So they've applied for a grant for the mitigation for those electrical systems to encase them so that if the water comes up above them, it won't affect the operation of the water treatment plant. So outside of Oakland County, also with those hazard mitigation and BRIC grants, oh, this is another one, I'm sorry. We also have a project right now that we were approved for the EOC project scoping. We're building a new EOC here in Oakland County. We're making it a hardened facility. And part of that is the scoping for the building to see what we need to do in order to make it appropriate for that. So the BRIC grant really paid us how much?
So we got about $460,000 to do the pre-design and schematic design work on the building for the hardening portion. So even if we don't, we haven't even gotten to building it yet, but even helping us to plan for that, there's potential money available.
And then in addition to that, this year we were approved for a hazard mitigation plan update. That money has not flowed to us yet. We're waiting on the state to approve that money, like we said before. And that's for an update to the county's hazard mitigation plan. It's required for future hazard mitigation funding. It's also required in the case of a disaster for the community to have signed off on their hazard mitigation plan so that they will qualify for federal money under FEMA if they have a disaster in their community. Other examples in the state that have been approved in the last few years, some of them I'm going to explain here in a moment, but things that have been approved: acquisition, $23 million, culvert upgrade, $4.5 million, detention and retention basins, $2.5 million, early warning systems, $3.5 million. Some of these are no longer applicable to the BRIC grant or the hazard mitigation grant. That's one of them. Early warning sirens are no longer part of that grant, but they still listed here because it was in the past. And some other things like home elevation management costs. The hazard mitigation plan is a big one, and safe rooms are also a big one that we use here in the state. For example, Clinton County, for stormwater mitigation, they received a total of $588,000 for a mitigation project to encase a couple of their water runoff in the county that affected large numbers of homes and a large part of their population. Clinton Township did a stormwater improvement plan that elevated utilities and sealed manholes in their community. They got $173,000 for that. The city of Dearborn Heights actually purchased 15 properties, including 3 vacant parcels along the Ecorse River. That was a $2,138,000 project. They were able to raise those homes. Those homes traditionally over the years flooded when the Ecorse River flooded, and now those homes are no longer there. So the money that was paid every 2 to 3 years to rebuild or repair those homes is no longer being spent. And that's the purpose of those acquisition projects. City of Dearborn did a stormwater sewer separation project in which they were able to get $5.3 million for that project. That is just, they had a combined sewer. They tried to do a combined sewer overflow project. It failed. And now they're doing stormwater sewer separation in the whole city, and they were able to get that $5 million for that. City of Detroit got 3 police precincts. They were able to get generators for that in the amount of $275,000. Generators, along with warning sirens, are no longer available to purchase through the BRIC grants, but they are things that in the past have been available, and in language in the future they could be available again. It just depends on the independent language, or depends on the language that they have in the grant when the grant comes out. Estro Beach elevated 3 homes 2 feet above flood level to the cost of $496,000. But now those 3 homes, when they have their annual flooding, no longer will be underwater, and they won't have to pay the insurance costs or the uninsured costs to repair those homes. Genesee County purchased 24 warning sirens, again, $347,000, but those are no longer available funds under this grant. Lansing acquired and demolished 8 homes, again, that were in a floodplain, a total of $262,000, and those homes, again, no longer will be in the floodplain.
With those, what they'll look at is a history. So something floods one time, they're likely not to pay the cost of acquiring it. But if it's a repeated issue, they'll look at it and say, well, rather than we keep getting disasters declared here and paying money out to communities to deal with this, it would be cheaper in the long run to pay to move these people somewhere else. And no longer, there's requirements that come with that. Like you won't be able to, no one else will be able to put a home there when that's in a flood zone. But it does require some history and documentation of the reason why that needs to happen.
Lawton and the city of Linden were able to purchase generators for their village hall police departments and fire departments. That total was $79,000, but again, generators are no longer eligible under the current grant. Michigan Department of Natural Resources installed 3 safe rooms at 3 state parks. That allows for tornado safe rooms for people who are in the campgrounds there. That total is $1,114,000. We'll see that here again in a second. In Muskegon County, they actually installed 11 safe rooms in Twin Lake, Michigan at an 80-acre mobile home park. to the total of almost $1 million. They were able to make the entire mobile home park have enough safe rooms for all the residents there to be able to go to in the event of a tornado. Newaygo County, flood warning and inundation mapping is what they got. It was a GIS product that they were able to hire an independent company to come in and do that mapping project for them for $126,000. And finally, the Presqu'île Road Commission actually replaced a current 3-culvert bridge with a single span bridge to allow for better draining and to stop a flooding problem that they had behind the bridge every year that would flood over the road and it would flood into backyards of homes that didn't quite get to homes. But that cost was $560,000 to replace that bridge and help with better drainage.
To touch on some further details about grants, I mentioned earlier that after a disaster, grant funds become available, and those affected jurisdictions first. But again, it's important that those jurisdictions, one, have those disasters listed in their plan, and generally they're looking for what is the issue that you have in that community, and what would you do if you had the money. By putting these potential projects or concerns in your plan, you're not committing to spending a dollar. The importance of it is that you've identified the issue, and that's how you could become eligible or money. But I know in previous conversations, sometimes with communities, they have a concern that if they say, well, we know it's flooded over this road twice and we've had to fix it. If we put it in there, we're going to get questioned, well, why aren't you fixing it? Generally, the answer is fairly simple. We don't have the funds for it. That's okay. You're not committing to anything when you put it in this plan, but it's important to put it in there again so that you can become eligible for money. We mentioned hazard mitigation plans. We get a grant to help pay for us to do this plan. We'll bring in an outside company to work with us, help us work with the communities, help us work with the public to help get this done and make sure that that plan makes every community in the county eligible for funds. Now, these grants are generally a 75-25 match, meaning they provide 75% and the local community has to provide 25%. But that does not mean a cash match. That can be an in-kind match. So the time spent by the planners or the engineers or people working on a project, those costs count towards that 25%. Your finance people working on it, secretarial, administrative staff, all of those things you have to document it, but you can have a 25% match where you don't actually spend any money. And that's generally what we do with our hazard mitigation plan. We generally don't actually spend any money on that. It's enough time with our staff that covers our match. Brick grants, we mentioned, safe rooms have been mentioned. So when we talk about building our new building, technically it's a safe room grant. And what that means is we want to build this facility so that it could sustain FEMA requirements for the region. For us, that means an F5 tornado. I think it's withstanding a 8-foot 2x4 on its end at 100 and some miles an hour, being able to hit a window. So that's what we're applying for. So we're doing the scoping project on buildings. There's actually 3 buildings that we're looking at. But the brick grant and the funds are only available, one for our building, which is a 911 emergency operations center, but also only for the hardening portion. So we're getting 75% of the portion that involves planning and designing a facility to hardening. And that's what they've approved. And then we'll use that project and that money to then turn around and apply to try to get funds to pay for the construction of the safe room portion of a new building. So again, that would be a 75-25% match. In that case, we certainly would be putting out funds to pay for that 25%, but we're hoping to build a new building anyway. So if we can get 5, 7, 10 million of that in the form of a brick grant, that will be important. It's important who benefits. So we mentioned that cost benefit analysis before. So in this case, for the EOC, normally you would say the Emergency Operations Center 911 Center covers 1.23 million people in Oakland County. But we reached out to the state. The state has their Emergency Operations Center in Lansing. But their backup is frankly in an old building that isn't hardened. So we've come to an agreement with the state where this new facility would be a backup for the state. By making that facility a backup for the state, now when we do a cost benefit analysis, it's a benefit for the entire state, not just for Oakland County. And that will help us. It helped us in our grant for the schematic design, and it likely will help us when we apply for the grant for the construction. So it's important to understand and look at these well ahead of time. The other thing that I think is important is to not try to do an application and hurry up and do it next month. We know every year there's going to be hazard mitigation money for their annual. We know fairly regularly there's post-disaster money. Our recommendation is always to have what we call shovel-ready projects. There are issues or concerns that you've identified in your plan. It's something you would like to fix if you have the money. It could be something as simple as the backflow preventers or storm sewer management, but have that project ready, know what it is. So when the state comes out and the feds come out and say, hey, there's post-disaster money available, you're pretty ready to submit that. You've already done most of the homework. You might just be updating some current costs and you're ready to submit that plan, because money, post-disaster money, pretty routinely, a portion of that goes unused. So it's much smaller competitive group when you're just applying within the state as when you're applying across the nation. So, but having a good cost-effective one with a good plan is really important. It is important to make sure that you're working with established editions of specifications and standards and codes. Again, that changes, and you're all probably much more familiar with those than we are. Again, that it aligns with the plan. And then anytime there's a project, they look at environmental and historic preservation requirements. Some of those, depending on the type of project you're doing, can be more complicated than others. It certainly is when we do a building. But the other point we wanted to make is that our office is always here to try to help guide as much as we can. And when we don't know the answer, we have very good communication with the hazard mitigation grant officer at the state, so we can help. They want to help us get good applications and help us get funding for our communities. So anytime we can help, we're asking you, please feel free to reach out and call us. Just some examples for 22, there was $2 million in discretionary funding to the state of Michigan. So that's where the state is evaluating projects and deciding which ones are most worthy. And then over $2 billion nationally competitive. The cap on projects is $50 million. That's the largest. They do look at them to be phased, and that's another example of our building one where we're doing the scoping first, and then we're looking at building it later with a phased project. And then also, they give you 36 months to expend the funds. So it's not like you get the money and you got to hurry up and start next week. It does, most of the federal grants are 3 months long, and they give us time to expend those.
And just because the cap is at 50 million per project doesn't mean you can't have a culvert project that you've been putting off on a road because you don't have the immediate funds to do it, but it's going to be only $60,000 for this culvert project. Apply for it, because that stormwater runoff that may affect houses downstream, and even smaller projects like that. If you saw the list I gave, there are quite a few that are in that $50,000 to $100,000 range, not necessarily in the millions. So please look at those as well.
And the history of issues that you've had there is important. So documentation of even local flooding every time there's significant weather, we're sending out an email to the emergency management contact from each of your communities. We did it last night saying, hey, there's a storm coming. Please update that. We have emergency management software that is available again to the emergency management contact in every community where they can update that. We'll collect that information so that it helps another place to maybe have a retention of that information that'll be available when it comes time to apply for these kind of funds, whether it's from a disaster or just a regular hazard mitigation or BRIC grant. Because having that content about why and what's going on and where that savings is important. So I would recommend that if you don't know who it is, find out who the emergency management liaison is in your communities. Many times it's the fire department chief, but it's not a given. In some communities, Southfield, some of the bigger ones, there's a designated emergency manager there. I think I saw Justin was joining a little earlier. He's a local emergency management contact there and a great partner, and it really helps when we share that kind of information. So again, funding, we're anticipating generally around September of this year is likely when the fiscal year 23 application period will open. That will start with really what amounts to a short form that is sent to the state, a notice of intent, saying, here's a kind of an overview of the project that we're thinking of doing. Here's what we think it will cost. It's just a big picture view. And then the state will look at that. They likely will reach out to the contact for it, ask some follow-up questions. They'll talk about whether they think it's eligible. If it's not eligible, maybe what changes might need to be made. And again, help make that a grant eligible project if they can. So if the state of Michigan approves it at their level, then it moves to a full application process, which is done online through the FEMA Gold portal. And then there's a pretty short time frame from when the state says yes and moves it on from the notice of intent to the full application. So you want to be ready to complete that application as soon as the state says yes. And although the state doesn't require much information, you want to be ready with everything because it's a pretty short window after that. There are some information helpful that's coming up. FEMA's hosting a virtual mitigation planning workshop in March. I sent out a PDF version of this with the links in it. So Jim will have that available to you. And then the most recent version of the local mitigation planning policy guide is on there as well. Our contact information is in here again. Our office, if there's not someone in our office, our building safety division answers and has access to an on-call person 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You know, that's part of our role. So if there's ever an emergency or somebody really needs to get a hold of us, you can. I've also listed our phone numbers and email contacts down there below for Rob and I. And then we have specialists assigned to different areas around the county. So again, if somebody has a project or just really if you're just thinking about a project and you're not sure, feel free to give us a call. We'll work with you on it and see what we can do to help make that eligible. So why do we do this? Online here today is also my daughter. She's a civil engineering junior and interested in being a city planner. She's an ROTC person, going to be going to the Air Force after she graduates college. But it's important stuff. We do know how important planners are. And like I said, she's had an interest in engineering and really lately over the course of the last year has talked a lot about being a city planner and has a great interest in that. So she wanted to sit in today, but that's again, that's why we all do these things. That's why you do what you do to make sure that your communities are safe and well planned out so that they can be there for our next generation. With that, I'm going to pull up the chat and see if we have any questions there.
Yeah, Tom, I'll go ahead and get the questions to you because they were coming directly to me.
Okay.
First question is, power outages happen chronically during extreme weather events. Which power companies, government agencies, universities, or other private companies are engaged in research projects to develop infrastructure innovations that will reduce or prevent the incidence of those outages? And which innovations or experiments are most promising? And how soon would you expect that they might be implemented?
So we do have regular communication with both DTE and consumers. They are both for-profit agencies, and they can be a bit touchy with trying to give up research and what they're doing with the future, because they are competitive. So those tend to be a little tighter or closer conversations with maybe with the state than they have with us. Now, do we talk to them about the resiliency of their system? You know, how are they doing with, you know, increasing underground lines, with having, you know, stations be more resilient and secure? We do have those conversations. Getting into the technology of what they're doing and how that might advance, I will admit they're a little reluctant to give us too many details into the background. I don't know, Rob, if you have anything further. But they won't give up a lot on that, maybe with the state.
Actually, transmission companies are much more open to telling us what their innovations are and how they're improving the transmission of electricity from the plant to their customer, which are the companies. But the companies themselves are very proprietary, and it's really difficult to get information like that from them.
Okay, good. I don't have any other questions in the chat at the moment. Please, just as a reminder, please send those questions to me through the chat if you have any.
I'll mention it again one more time then. At some point here in the next few months, all of your communities will be reaching out to ask to participate in some planning sessions for this upcoming hazard mitigation plan. And then every city most cities in the county will adopt the county plan. There's a couple, Royal Oak, sometimes Birmingham, that adopt their own plan, but if they don't want to, they can always adopt the county plan. But that will be important, again, to make these funds available and to make it really useful. It's important that we have all of you involved in that planning process.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions coming in. So with that, just a couple of reminders that when the session is being recorded, and I put in the chat a link to the county webpage where that'll be available. I'll give it a week or two while we get that ready for placement, and then that'll have the corresponding documentation. You'll see the slides with the references to Thom and Rob's contact information. So I'll take this opportunity to thank both of you for excellent presentation, and thanks all for participating.
Well, thanks for having us. We appreciate the time. Look forward to working with you all.
Great. All right, we'll see you next time. Thank you.